All right, welcome to question 3 of the 2024 APCSA FRQs. Now, question 3 is always about arrays and array lists. In particular, it really tests your ability to use certain functions like .size or .get and index of, as we'll later see, especially in this part A. So be sure you study up on the reference guide and all the different methods that come, especially with the array list class. If we look back at the 2022 and 2023 exams, they all test you on your ability and your familiarity with these methods. So just get familiar and make sure you're not surprised. Okay, let's jump into how we're going to do this question. As always, let's read the question together. We'll write some pseudocode, and then we'll figure out the right syntax for this problem. Let's make this bigger. This question involves blah, blah, blah. There's a word checker class. We have an array list called word list, and we have to write two methods. In part A, we're going to write the isWordChain method. It's going to return true if elements of word list contains the previous element as a substring and return false otherwise. All right, what does that mean? Let's look down on page 2 where we can get some examples. So this method determines whether each element of word list contains the previous element as a substring. So as an example, you have an and then band. So if an is in band, then you keep going. And if band is in band, you keep going. And then if band is in abandon, then you return true. This example here, you see how 2 is in 2 is in stool, but stool is not in tools. Therefore, you return false. All right, seems straightforward enough. Let's write out some pseudocode. So first thing is we need to loop through the list and compare each word, right? So I'll start with a for loop. And again, I'm not going to worry about syntax for now. I'm going to start my index at 1 because I want to start on the second word and be able to compare backwards. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit tricky when I get to the end. So I'll start with 1 and I'm comparing the word before it. And then I'm going to make sure that this continues to loop until I reaches the size of the array list. So I'll say like array list size. And then I will always, iterate or, increment rather I every time I run through the loop. Okay, so now what do we want to happen within the loop? We want to compare the first item. We want to compare list like I versus list I minus 1. And specifically, we want to say like if list I minus 1 is not in list I, then we want to return false. Right, so this is saying that if the previous word is not in this current word that we're on, then we want to return false. Otherwise, we're going to keep looping. We're going to loop, loop, loop. And then at the very end, if I go through the entire list and I'm never returning false, then I can return true. Now that's really it. The tricky part is how are we going to write out this piece of logic, right? How do we going to write out whether or not one word is in another word? And we'll get to that, but if this is our logic, then I think we can start writing out this in the correct Java syntax. So I am going to maybe comment this out, and we'll write out our actual real code here. So again, we're going to start with the for loop. And we're going to say int I is equal to 1. I is less than word list. Remember, word list is something that we already have in the class. And we're going to do .size. Remember, we have to use .size as opposed to length because we're using an array list as opposed to a regular array. And that is the same here. So we have our for loop written. Now, how are we going to compare the two different words? One easy way here is we're going to actually set a variable so that it makes it a little bit easier for us down the road. I'm going to set current to word list dot get I. So this gets me the value for index I. And then I'll set another variable called previous word list dot get I minus 1. And this gets me the value of the previous word. And now comes the part where I'm actually going to compare the two. For this part, we're going to use the function index of. So if current dot index of previous is equal to -1, meaning it was not found in the current word, then we can return false. Now, I think a lot of students might struggle with knowing how to use index of or even thinking of it. So that's really the crux of the problem here, which is why we really want to be able to study up on this sheet. It's annoying, but knowing how to use index of, and this reference sheet literally tells you it returns -1 if it's not found. Knowing this is super helpful and necessary for the test, frankly. Okay, I think we have what we need. I want to make sure I have all my semicolons in place. And I think that's really it. So let's check our answer. Here we go. 3 out of 3. Perfect. Now, I also have a version where if you don't know index of, you could kind of manually write this out. It becomes very, very long, but here's what it looks like. You know, I have everything here the same, and I wrote out a manual method. And I added a bunch of comments here so you can kind of read how the manual method works. But basically, we're comparing letter by letter within each word. It becomes very unwieldy. And so if you find yourself writing more than like 3 for loops, you might want to question whether or not this is the right strategy to take for this question. But again, if I were to check my answer, it should give me a full score because I am doing this correctly. All right, cool. That's it. And I will see you for part 3B.